All right, tell me about your parents.
I had great parents. They taught me a whole lot, even though they were not always present. Um, my father, I'll just start with him. When I was born, first of all, before I was born, when he got out of the service, they opened a grocery store out in the country, they called it. And that's when Mark was born, and he lived out in this country. And then he went to work. No, then he bought this other store in downtown Baltimore, where I guess that's when Barry and I were born and they needed room. And so we lived on the top of the store. It was a little corner grocery store in downtown Baltimore. And we lived at the top of the store. And I gave some memories to that, but not a whole lot that I remember even about what it looked like living up there. But and then he went to work for Glen L. Martin. He had been a communications expert, I guess, telegraph and all that in the Navy. And he loved that job, from what I understand. And he had good friends from that job, and he would come home at a regular time, like 5:30. He'd be home, and his friends and him would go bowling, or they'd sit around, out on the street and talk and stuff like that. And but then Glenn L. Martin decided that when the space program was going to start, they originally were going to start it in Colorado, and they wanted him to move. They wanted to keep him. They wanted him to move to Colorado, and him and my mother would not move to Colorado, more because of the weather than anything else. But I think it had stuff to do with family and friends. People just didn't, back then, people didn't just move like that. So anyway, so Glen L. Martin ended, and all he knew was the grocery business. So he bought a corner grocery, or they bought a corner grocery store in downtown Baltimore again. And through this whole thing, that's when I learned how hard they both worked. My mother and him, especially. It was different when he worked at Glen L. Martin. She got some kind of a job, I don't remember what, but they were home at night. We had dinners together. Sunday we ate together. Every Friday night, we all gathered around our little TV at night and watched the Flintstones and Paladin and cowboy shows. And my mother would make Jiffy Pop popcorn, and it was really a nice time. I mean, that's when we were all together as a family. Once they opened the store downtown, though, she had to work down there. They couldn't, and yet at the same time, she had three boys that she had to get off to school and take care of. So both of them, this is when I really learned how much they sacrificed for us. Because my father had to work. The store opened at 7 in the morning and closed at 6 at night. Every night, except Saturday and Sunday. Saturday and Sunday he closed maybe 2 hours early. He still had to be down there at 7 o'clock. Sunday he worked from 7 to 1. So you can add up
Mm.
the hours and think about how hard he worked. And what she did was she got us ready for school. And I think I've said, think of a person that has to, first of all, do what wives were supposed to do back then: keep the house clean and everything, wash three boys' clothes, the whole family's clothes, and dry them by hanging them out on a line to dry, and then making lunch every day of the week for 5 people, having lunch ready for 5 people every day of the week. And then she would pre-make our dinner, um, and leave us instructions: put it in the oven at 350 or whatever. And so we would make our own dinner because they wouldn't get home till like 7 o'clock at night, or 7:30, whatever it was. And she would always, I always say she always had a cake or a pie made for us to have for dessert. Dessert was a normal thing. We always had dessert. Um, but by the time they got home, I mean, they were dead tired. They didn't. My father didn't have time to play ball with me or have a catch or teach me anything. Um, and the same with my mother. Although she did a lot of volunteer type stuff. When there were days where she wouldn't go to the store till after she got us off to school, or even till later in the afternoon. Um, and she volunteered to read the kindergarten class and stuff like that. Um, but then she would take the bus down to Federal Street and then walk to the store from there and finish the rest of the day with my father down there. And on the weekends, they both worked the whole time. So, us boys kind of, I don't want to say we raised ourselves because they taught us. If there's one thing I can say, the most, aside from love, the most valuable thing I learned from my parents was a work ethic. They they taught me that if you want to live a life, you got to make sacrifices. You got to do things the right way. And my father, uh, whenever he did, I don't know, but he taught me how to use every tool in the toolbox, and I still know that to this day. He did teach us in Cub Scouts. He bought me and my brothers these little electric telegraph keys, and he taught us Morse code. And my mother was a den leader in Cub Scouts, and not only a den leader where she just had one den, she eventually took over the whole, as they called it, a pack, which is a whole bunch of dens, and she was the head den mother, so she volunteered for that. My father did help. I don't know where he found the time, but he helped us build our cars for the Pinewood Derby races and things. And I say us, but again, I don't recall Barry being in Cub Scouts. Mark, as I said, he went from Cub Scouts to Boy Scouts. He won all the award merit badges and all that kind of stuff. I like Cub Scouts because I like the meetings. I like the uniform. There was one day a week they would let us wear our Cub Scout uniforms to school, and I really looked forward to that because I thought it was really cool. But anyhow, they did find time to do things like that, which when I look back at it now, it's like, when the heck did they find time to do it? But they worked their asses off. I mean, when you talk about my parents, they worked their asses off. And then as we got older, even when, they had very little money, we never realized it. The only thing we realized was that all our friends got the latest new toys and the Mattel guns and things like that, where we got kind of the lower level of those kind of things. And the same thing with clothes. We were never the stylish. I was always wearing Mark's hand-me-downs, and Barry was always wearing my hand-me-downs. And maybe that was another resentment thing about Mark, was that he always got the clothes first when they were new. But we didn't have a lot of money, but we as kids we never thought about it. If we went on a vacation, it was to drive 10 or 12 hours to North Carolina, to Wilmington, to be with my aunt and uncle and my cousins that lived down there. We never did things at that time like Ocean City. Never heard of it. It was just nothing. I know that my father finally got an above ground pool, and that took up our entire backyard, and we had that to swim in and everything. But again, we lived a nice life. We never thought about, we're not getting this or we're not getting that. We always felt happy, as far as I know, Mark and Barry felt the same way. And so they taught us a lot about that kind of thing, work ethic, sacrifice, family, and then you'd see the two of them on the Jewish holidays, for instance, Passover or whatever. They would invite the world, and you remember that table growing and growing and growing as our family grew, and somehow they managed to put out a spread for all of us, and they just did it. So I don't know. What more can you say about them? They were wonderful parents.
Do you remember anything about your grandparents?
Not much at all. My father's parents did not speak English at all. They were very religious Jews, and even he didn't spend a lot of time with them. He would go to make sure they were okay. They had a little house or apartment that he and I think my Uncle Sam probably paid for, and they both took care of them. And they would go down there every few weeks, and once in a blue moon they would take us with them because they had to do something with us. And they would introduce us, but my grandparents hardly knew who we were. We would played outside while they sat inside with them, and they had a little jungle gym out there, so the three boys would play out there. But they didn't speak English, so we hardly knew them. My grandfather, my grandmother on my mother's side, died 3 months before I was born, or something like that. I was named for her, so we never knew her. Um, my mother's father, we knew a little bit more, but again, it wasn't the kind of, I don't know how I learned to be a grandfather. I mean, he was a very nice person. When he came to see us, he always kissed us and hugged us, and always had a silver dollar for each of us whenever he came to visit. But it wasn't the kind of thing where he visited us on a regular basis or we visited them on a regular basis. I suspected there were times when he was sitting at the table, the dining room table with my parents, talking serious stuff, and I suspected it was when they needed money, whether it was to buy the store or something else. I'm just guessing about that because they never mentioned anything like that. But we didn't have a grandparental relationship, I guess. So they were semi strangers. I mean, so yeah, we didn't get to know them a lot. Again, my parents taught us to respect them, and we did. But couldn't have told you much about them, or and even to this day, knew nothing about where they came from, what they did before they came to this country, which I do want to find out. And even my cousins, their other grandchildren, knew nothing about them. Just, it was never that kind of relationship.